I'm Dr. Cheryl Meier, and I'm a psychologist, and we're going to continue with our story. I decided to, it's funny you can hear the ice cream man or woman outside. It's very clever to do on such a day. Get ice cream for all the kids that are at home. I'm sure they'll love it. So I decided to light a candle for today's reading, because if you want to stare at something, I'll try to get a candle for the next time that you can see the flame. I just saw it, so you can see the flame better, and so there's something you can concentrate on while you're just listening to the story and letting it soak in. All right. So, chapter 4, we're reading The Princess and the Goblin by George MacDonald. Chapter 4. What the nurse thought of it. "Why, where can you have been, Princess?" asked the nurse, taking her in her arms. "It's very unkind of you to hide away so long. I began to be afraid." Here she checked herself. "What were you afraid of, nursie?" asked the princess. "Never mind," she answered. "Perhaps I will tell you another day. Now tell me where you have been." "I've been up a long way to see my very great, huge, old grandmother," said the princess. "What do you mean by that?" asked the nurse, who thought she was making fun. "I mean that I've been a long way up and up to see my great-grandmother." "Ah, nursie, you don't know what a beautiful mother or grandmother's I've got upstairs. She is such an old lady with such lovely white hair. As white as my silver cup. Now, when I think of it, I think her hair must be silver." "What nonsense are you talking, princess?" said the nurse. "I'm not talking nonsense," returned Irene, rather offended. "I will tell you all about her. She's much taller than you and much prettier." "Oh, I dare say," remarked the nurse. "And she lives upon pigeons' eggs." "Oh, most likely," said the nurse. "And she sits in an empty room, spinning all day long." "Not a doubt of it," said the nurse. "And she keeps her crown in her bedroom." "Of course, quite the proper place to keep her crown in. She wears it in bed, I'll be bound." This is nurse speaking. I haven't got the different voices yet, so we'll do what we can. Use your beautiful imagination. "She didn't say that, and I don't think she does. That wouldn't be comfortable, would it? I don't think my papa wears his crown for a nightcap. Does he, nursie?" "I never asked him. I dare say he does." "And she's been there ever since I came here, ever so many years." "Anybody could have told you that," said the nurse, who did not believe a word Irene was saying. "Why didn't you tell me then?" "There was no necessity. You could make it all up for yourself." "You don't believe me, then?" exclaimed the princess, astonished and angry, as well as she might be. "Did you expect me to believe you, princess?" asked the nurse coldly. "I know princesses are in the habit of telling make-believes, but you are the first I ever heard of who expected to have them believed," she added, seeing that the child was strangely in earnest. The princess burst into tears. "Well, I must say," remarked the nurse, now thoroughly vexed with her for crying, "it's not at all becoming in a princess to tell stories and expect to be believed just because she's a princess. But it's quite true, I tell you." "You've dreamt it then, child." "No, I didn't dream it. I went upstairs and I lost myself. And if I hadn't had found the beautiful lady, I should never have found myself." "Oh, I dare say. Well, you just come up with me and see if I'm not telling the truth. Indeed, I have other work to do. It's your dinner time, and I won't have any more such nonsense." The princess wiped her eyes, and her face grew so hot that they were soon quite dry. She sat down to her dinner, but ate next to nothing. Not to be believed does not at all agree with princesses, for a real princess cannot tell a lie. So all the afternoon she did not speak a word. Only when the nurse spoke to her, she answered her, for a real princess is never rude, even when she does well to be offended. Of course the nurse was not comfortable in her mind, not that she suspected the least truth in Irene's story, but that she loved her dearly and was vexed with herself for having been cross to her. She thought her crossness was the cause of the princess's unhappiness, and had no idea that she was really and deeply hurt at not being believed. But as it became more and more plain during the evening in her every motion and look that although she tried to amuse herself with her toys, her heart was too vexed and troubled to enjoy them. Her nurse's discomfort grew and grew. When bedtime came, she undressed and laid her down, but the child, instead of holding up her little mouth to be kissed, turned away from her and lay still. Then Nursie's heart gave way altogether, and she began to cry. At the sound of her first sob, the princess turned again and held her face to kiss her as usual, but the nurse had her handkerchief to her eyes, and she did not see the movement. "Nursie," said the princess, "why won't you believe me?" "Because I can't believe you," said the nurse, getting angry again. "Ah, then you can't help it," said Irene. "And I will not be vexed with you any more. I will give you a kiss and go to sleep." "You little angel," cried the nurse, and caught her out of bed and walked about the room with her in her arms, kissing and hugging her. "You will let me take you to see my dear old great big grandmother, won't you?" said the princess, as she laid her down again. "And you won't say I'm ugly any more, will you, princess?" The nurse is saying this to her. "Nursie, I never said you were ugly. What can you mean?" "Well, if you didn't say it, you meant it." "Indeed, I never did." "You said I wasn't so pretty as that, as my beautiful grandmother." "Yes, I did say that, and I say it again, for it's quite true." "Then I do think you are unkind," said the nurse, and put her handkerchief to her eyes again. "Nursie, dear, everybody can't be as beautiful as every other body, you know. You are very nice looking. But if you had been as beautiful as my grandmother—" "Oh, bother your grandmother," said the nurse. "Nurse, that's very rude. You're not fit to be spoken to till you can behave better." The princess turned away once more, and again the nurse was ashamed of herself. "I'm sure I beg your pardon, princess," she said, though still in an offended tone. But the princess let the tone pass and heeded only the words. "You won't say it again, I am sure," she answered, once more turning towards her nurse. "I was only going to say that if you had been twice as nice looking as you are, some king or other would have married you, and then what would have become of me?" "You're an angel," repeated the nurse, again embracing her. "Now," insisted Irene, "you will come and see my grandmother, won't you?" "I will go with you anywhere you like, my cherub," she answered, and in 2 minutes the weary little princess was fast asleep. Chapter 5. The Princess Lets Well Alone. When she woke the next morning, the first thing she heard was the rain still falling. Indeed, this day was so like the last that it would have been difficult to tell where was the use of it. The first thing she thought of, however, was not the rain, but the lady in the tower, and the first question that occupied her thoughts was whether she should not ask the nurse to fulfill her promise this very morning and go with her to find her grandmother as soon as she had had her breakfast. But she came to the conclusion that perhaps the lady would not be pleased if she took anyone to see her without first asking leave, especially if it was pretty evident, seeing she lived on pigeons' eggs and cooked them herself, that she did not want the household to know she was there. So the princess resolved to take the first opportunity of running up alone and asking whether she might bring her nurse. She believed the fact that she could not otherwise convince her she was telling the truth would have been much weight with her grandmother. One other thing is, in the unabridged, this is unabridged as far as we know, but someone edited out this one part that was so beautiful in the first chapter. I remember taking a class and the professor was telling us about this first part where, and I have it, you can find it on the online version, which is the original. George MacDonald put in it, the princess saying, "Excuse me, Mr. Editor, someone's asking, why is she a princess? Why do good stories always begin with, once there was a princess?" Something like this. And the editor replies, "Because all little girls are princesses. We are daughters of the king." And it's just this great part, but they just thought it was an editing mistake or something, so they took it out. It's worth looking up. Okay, here we continue. So the princess resolved to take her first opportunity of running up alone and asking whether she might bring her nurse. She believed that the fact that she could not otherwise convince her that she was telling the truth would have much weight with her grandmother. So her grandmother, she thought her grandmother would want the nurse to have this proven to her. The princess and her nurse were the best of friends all the dressing time, and the princess, in consequence, ate an enormous little breakfast. Hold on, I got a notification. "I wonder, Lootie," that was her pet name for her nurse, "what pigeons' eggs taste like," she said, as she was eating her egg, not quite a common one, for they always picked out the pinky ones for her. Little pink eggs. "We'll get you a pigeon's egg, and you shall judge for yourself," said the nurse. "Oh, no, no," returned Irene, suddenly reflecting they might disturb the old lady in getting it, and that even if they did not, she would have one less pigeon egg in consequence. "What a strange creature you are," said the nurse, "first to want a thing and then to refuse it." But she did not say it crossly, and the princess never minded any remarks that were not unfriendly. "Well, you see, Lootie, there are reasons," she returned, and said no more, for she did not want to bring up the subject of their former strife, lest her nurse should offer to go before she had her grandmother's permission to bring her. Of course she could refuse to take her, but then she would believe her less than ever. Now the nurse, as she said herself afterwards, could not be every moment in the room, and as never before yesterday had the princess given her the smallest reason for anxiety, it had not yet come into her head to watch her more closely. So she soon gave her a chance, and at the very first that offered, Irene was off and up the stairs again. This day's adventure, however, did not turn out like yesterday's, although it began like it, and indeed today is very seldom like yesterday. If people would note the differences, even when it rains. The princess ran through the passage after passage and could not find the stair of the tower. My own suspicion is that she had not gone up high enough, and was searching on the second instead of the third floor. When she turned to go back, she failed equally in her search after the stair. She was lost once more. Something made it even worse to bear this time, and it was no wonder that she cried again. Suddenly it occurred to her that it was after having cried before that she had found her grandmother's stair. She got up at once, wiped her eyes, and started upon a fresh quest. This time, although she did not come on a stair that went up, but she came upon one that went down. It was evidently not the stair she had come up, yet it was a good deal better than none. So down she went, and was singing merrily before she reached the bottom, and there, to her surprise, she found herself in the kitchen. Although she was not allowed to go there alone, her nurse had often taken her, and she was a great favorite with the servants. So there was a general rush at her the moment she appeared, for everyone wanted to have her, and the report of where she was soon reached the nurse's ears. She came at once to fetch her, but she never suspected how she had got there, and the princess kept her own counsel. Her failure to find the old lady not only disappointed her, but made her very thoughtful. Sometimes she came almost to the nurse's opinion that she had dreamed all about her. But that fancy never lasted very long. She wondered much whether she should ever see her again, and thought it very sad not to have been able to find her when she particularly wanted her. I'm like, oh, I could cry. She resolved to say nothing more to her nurse on the subject, seeing it was so little in her power to prove her words. Here's the princess in the kitchen. All right, we have about 5 more minutes, so I'll see if I can get through this chapter. Ooh, there's more pictures. It's a long chapter. I think we'll go partially through it. This is chapter 6, called The Little Miner, like someone who mines. The next day, the great cloud still hung over the mountain, and the rain poured like water from a full sponge. The princess was very fond of being outdoors, and she nearly cried when she saw that the weather was no better. But the mist was not of such a dark, dingy gray. There was light in it, and as the hours went on, it grew brighter and brighter until it was almost too brilliant to look at. And late in the afternoon, the sun broke out so gloriously that Irene clapped her hands, crying, "See, see, Lootie, the sun has had his face washed. Look how bright he is. Do get my hat and let us go out for a walk. Oh dear, how happy I am." Of course, because the sun's out. Lootie was very glad to please the princess. She got her hat and cloak, and they set out together for a walk up the mountain, for the road was so hard and steep that the water could not rest upon it. And it was always dry enough for walking a few minutes after the rain ceased. The clouds were rolling away in broken pieces like great, over-woolly sheep. The clouds were like that today. I wish I'd taken a picture. I was in the car. It was so beautiful. Because it was just raining here. Like great, over-woolly sheep whose wool the sun had bleached till it was almost too white for the eyes to bear. Between them, the sky shone with a deeper and purer blue because of the rain. The trees on the roadside were hung all over with drops which sparkled in the sun like jewels. Oh, maybe I'll turn the light on. It's a little bright. Let's see. Yeah, you can't see it. I'll turn it off so you can see the candle, maybe. All right. Which sparkled in the sun like jewels. The only things that were no brighter for the rain were the brooks that ran down the mountain. They had changed from the clearness of crystal to a muddy brown, but what they lost in color they gained in sound, or at least in noise, for a brook, when it is swollen, is not so musical as before. But Irene was in raptures with the great brown streams tumbling down everywhere, and Lootie shared in her delights, for she too had been confined to the house for 3 days. At length she observed that the sun was getting low, and said it was time to be going back. She made the remark again and again, but every time the princess begged her to go on a little farther and a little farther, reminding her that it was much easier to go downhill. That sounds like me on my walks. And saying that when they did turn, they would be at home in a moment. So on and on they did go, now to look at a group of ferns, over whose tops a stream was pouring in a watery arch, now to pick a shining stone from a rock by the wayside, now to watch the flight of some bird. Suddenly the shadow of a great mountain peak came up from behind and shot in front of them. When the nurse saw it, she started and shook, and catching hold of the princess's hand, turned and began to run down the hill. "What's all the haste, nursie?" asked Irene, running alongside of her. We must not be out a moment longer." "But we can't help being out a good many moments longer." It was true. The nurse almost cried. They were much too far from home. It was against express orders to be out with the princess 1 moment after the sun was down, and they were nearly a mile up the mountain. If His Majesty Irene's papa were to hear of it, Lootie would certainly be dismissed, and to leave the princess would break her heart. It was no wonder she ran, but Irene was not in the least frightened, not knowing anything to be frightened at. She kept on chattering as well as she could, but it was not easy. "Lootie, Lootie, why do you run so fast? It shakes my teeth when I talk." "Then don't talk," said Lootie, but the princess went on talking. She was always saying, "Look, Lootie, look, look." But Lootie paid no more heed to anything she said, only ran on. "Look, look, Lootie, don't you see that funny man peeping over the rock?" Lootie only ran the faster. They had to pass the rock, and when they came near, the princess saw it was only a lump of the rock itself that she had taken for a man. "Look, look, Lootie, there's such a curious creature at the foot of that old tree. Look at it, Lootie. It's making faces at us, I do think. Ludi gave a stifled cry and ran faster still, so fast that Irene's little legs could not keep up with her, and she fell with a clash. It was a hard downhill road, and she had been running very fast, so it was no wonder she began to cry. This put the nurse nearly beside herself, but all she could do was to run on, and the moment she got the princess on her feet again. "Who's that laughing at me?" said the princess, trying to keep in her sobs and running too fast for her grazed knees. Oh, here, let me show you the picture. And I'll show you the next picture. We'll get to this part, and then I'll wrap it up. "Nobody, child," said the nurse, almost angrily, but that instant there came a burst of coarse tittering from somewhere near, and a hoarse, indistinct voice that seemed to say, "Lies, lies, lies." "Oh!" cried the nurse, with a sigh that was almost a scream, and ran on faster than ever. "Nursey, Lutie, I can't run any more. Do let us walk a bit." "What am I to do?" said the nurse. "Here, I will carry you." She caught her up, but found her much too heavy to run with, and had to set her down again. Then she looked wildly about her and gave a great cry and said, "We've taken the wrong turning somewhere, and I don't know where we are. We are lost, lost." The terror she was in had quite bewildered her. It was true enough they had lost the way. They had been running down into a little valley in which there was no house to be seen. I'll show you that picture again of who's coming up to them. Now Irene did not know what good reason there was for her nurse's terror, for the servants had all strict orders never to mention the goblins to her. But it was very discomposing to see her nurse in such a fright. Before, however, that she had time to grow thoroughly alarmed, like her, she heard the sound of whistling, and that revived her. Presently she saw a boy coming up the road from the valley to meet them. He was the whistler. But before they met, his whistling changed to singing. And this is something like what he sang. Oh, I had to pull my guitar out and make a song to this. "Ring, dod, bang, go the hammers clang, hit and turn and bore, whiz and puff and roar. Thus we rive the rocks, force the goblin locks, see the shining ore, 1, 2, 3, bright as gold can be, 4, 5, 6, shovels, mattocks, picks, 7, 8, 9, light your lamp at mine, 10, 11, 12, loosely hold the helve. We're the merry miner boys, make the goblins hold their noise." "I wish you would hold your noise," said the nurse rudely, for the very word goblin at such a time and such a place made her tremble. It would bring the goblins upon them to a certainty, she thought, to defy them in such a way. But whether the boy heard her or not, he did not stop his singing. 13, 14, 15, this is worth the sifting. 16, 17, 18, there's the match, and lay it in. 19, 20, goblins in a plenty. "Do be quiet," cried the nurse in a whispered shriek. But the boy, who was now close at hand, still went on. "Hush, scush, scurry, there you go in a hurry. Gobble, gobble, goblin, there you go a-wobblin. Hobble, hobble, hobblin, cobble, cobble, cobblin. Hob, hob, goblin. Huh?" "There," said the boy, as he stood still opposite them. "There, that'll do for them. They can't bear singing. And they can't stand that song. They can't sing themselves, for they have no more voice than a crow, and they don't like other people to sing." The boy was dressed in a miner's dress, with a curious cap on his head. He was a very nice-looking boy, with eyes as dark as the mines in which he worked, and as sparkling as the crystals in their rocks. He was about 12 years old. His face was almost too pale for beauty, which came of his being so little in the open air and the sunlight, for even vegetables grown in the dark are white. But he looked happy, merry indeed, perhaps at the thought of having routed the goblins, and his bearing as he stood before them had nothing clownish or rude about it. "I saw them," he went on, "as I came up, and I'm very glad I did. I knew they were after somebody, but I couldn't see who it was. They won't touch you as long as I'm with you." "Why, who are you?" asked the nurse, offended at the freedom with which he spoke to them. "I'm Peter's son." "Who's Peter?" "Peter the miner." "I don't know him. I'm his son, though, And why should the goblins mind you, pray? Because I don't mind them, and I'm used to them. What difference does that make? If you're not afraid of them, they're afraid of you. If you're not afraid of them, they're afraid of you. I'm not afraid of them, that's all. But it's all that's wanted up here, that is. It's a different thing down there. They won't always mind that song, even down there. And if any one sings it, they stand grinning at him awfully. And if he gets frightened and misses a word or says a wrong one, don't they give it him? What do they give him? Asked Irene with a trembling voice. What do they do to him? Asked Irene with a trembling voice. Don't go frightening the princess, said the nurse. The princess, repeated the little miner, taking off his curious cap. I beg your pardon, but you oughtn't to be out here so late. Everybody knows that's against the law. Yes, indeed it is, said the nurse, beginning to cry again, and I shall have to suffer for it. What does that matter, said the boy. It must be your fault. It is the princess who will suffer for it. I hope they didn't hear you call her the princess. If they did, they're sure to know her again, and they're awfully sharp. Looty, Looty, cried the princess, take me home. Don't go on like that, said the nurse to the boy, almost fiercely. How could I help it? I lost my way. You shouldn't have been out so late. You wouldn't have lost your way if you hadn't been frightened, said the boy. Come along. I'll soon set you right. Shall I carry your little highness? Impertinence, murmured the nurse, but she did not say it aloud, for she thought it made him, if she made him angry, he might take his revenge by telling someone belonging to the house, and then it would be sure to come to the king's ears. No, thank you, said Irene. I can walk very well, though I can't run so fast as Nursey. If you will give me one hand, and Looty will give me another, and then I shall get on famously. Oh, it's been 25 minutes. We'll have to return back to here. Page 44. I'm so glad that Curdy came up. We'll see his name is Curdy. Did he say Curdy? Yes. Anyway, lots of love to you. We'll return another day.